Welcome, all you citizens of the world. I'm Michael James here in Rogers Park in Chicago, the very blue ward, and I'm welcoming you to another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. One sad note is Michael Lerner, who I remember from the free speech movement at Berkeley back in the 60s. He was also a participant in the Seattle 7. He passed away just recently. Michael Lerner had been involved with the New America movement, a precursor to the Democratic Socialists of America, and he founded the progressive journal Tikkun, which printed up until 2020. Sorry to lose Mike. He did a lot of good for everybody in the world. Moving right along, I'd like to let people know about an event that's happening this weekend on September 8th. If you're listening or viewing the show beforehand, come out to the Zine Fest in Logan Square at the Comfort Station right there at Diversey and Kedzie. I'll be there with my photos. Hope to see some of you. On the labor front, a number of hotel workers, mainly on the East and West Coasts, are out on strike, and we'll see what that brings. We'll keep you up to date. On the sports front, I have one little bit of news. There was a really nice photograph of North Korean and South Korean ping pong players celebrating together. I found online somewhere that the mixed double players from North Korea are in a little bit of trouble. They have been placed under ideological scrutiny. That website quoted high-ranking source as saying the athletes and members of the North Korean Olympic Committee had been undergoing a month-long ideological scrubbing since returning home in mid-August, and that they had been informed there were to be no fraternizing with other team members. So that's disappointing to hear, because it was really nice to see people getting along from all places in the world. It was quite a neat Olympics. And as many of you regular listeners or viewers to the show know, we've been covering the Olympics with a number of people over the last few weeks. And with that said, we're going to take a musical break and we'll be back with our first guest. Okay, all you citizens of the world, it's time for the first guest on Live from the Heartland. We are recording this on Labor Day for the week of September 7th, and I'm honored once again to bring my alderwoman back on, the one and only Maria Hadden, the alderperson from the fighting, very blue 49th Ward. Hello to you on Labor Day, Maria.
Hello, and happy Labor Day, Michael.
So far, it's really good. Now, let me ask you right off the get, how do you think the city handled the Democratic Convention, both on the inside and the outside?
I think we did a good job, and I think it's fitting. I'll say, as we're recording this on Labor Day, I want to take a moment to thank all of the union labor who made sure that the DNC went off without a hitch. Hosting such a large event, and not just a large event, but such a high profile event, is really a challenge. And so from, folks at the United Center to McCormick Place, to our transit workers, right, all the food service workers and hospitality folks at all the hotels and industries, everybody just went above and beyond, and our city shone. So I'm really pleased. I think most Chicagoans should be pleased with how, the public and private side of the city really came together, and how the people of Chicago welcomed all of our guests from the Democratic Party around the country. And we looked good.
Yeah, we did. Now, on the build up to it, there was a lot of tension around permits and marchers. And,
Yes.
I did get photographed back in 68. So trying to tip over a paddy wagon, and I had a little bit of attention. I did interviews with Judy Woodruff, with NPR, with Spanish TV, and some other ones, and they all wanted, of course, know about that, and they didn't really use much of me talking about now and the future. But I did hear that along the way that there was some tension between the mayor, who wanted to be a little bit more open on the marching, and the city's law department. Is that anything you can shed light on? Is that a true thing?
I can't speak to that, between the mayor and his law department. I do know that I certainly had a lot of anxiety. And I think, to your point, most of us did, leading up to this. How was our police department going to do? How was, were they going to be constitutional? Were people and demonstrators and folks coming to the city going to be able to voice their opinions and their First Amendment rights? Was the city going to, honor the permits for different things? And, on a personal note, I'll say, having been on the protest side of things, sometimes I feel like law departments would do better to work a little bit more with organizers, because a lot of times organizers are going to do it anyway. So it's like, there's trying to strike the right balance. I know with safety. Now, one thing that was interesting in hosting an event like this is that it wasn't just the city having the final say, but the Secret Service.
Yeah.
And so, that kind of complicates things a little bit. Ultimately, I know I did sign on to a letter raising some concerns that a bunch of other alders signed on to, a lot of progressives, that we were a little concerned leading up to the event about the kind of short length of the parade route given to the main protest, the locally organized one, and that the city had, promised to provide sound equipment and then kind of reneged on that. And, we had some safety concerns about it. Thankfully, everything worked out. There weren't necessarily as many people as they were expecting. And so some of the safety concerns we had about the shortness of the route they were given did not prove to be a problem. So, pleased about that. But, I commend the mayor and, the superintendent and all of our Chicago-based organizers for doing what they do best and making sure that anyone who showed up to demonstrate or protest was safe, was organized, was together. I know that was the advice I gave to kind of, neighbors and friends in the area. Like, hey, if you're going out to protest the DNC, just make sure you've got a safety plan. Make sure you're going to a locally organized event. That you know who the organizers are, because Chicagoans know how to organize and keep people safe. I was a little concerned. I think the only real problems we saw were from kind of that group that did that organized stuff. I think it was like on a Tuesday. They were kind of a group that seemed to be one of those outside groups. I know a lot of my local folks were not so keen about it. They were the folks pledging to make it like 68. I don't know if you saw some of
I
their
didn't follow.
they ended up doing some of the protesting down sound, and where I think the only arrests were made with a pretty intense group of people with an office based out of the Northwest side. So it was a little suspect, if you know what I mean, Michael.
Yeah, well, here we go talking about the outside agitators.
Yeah. It's a little suspect, a little suspicious.
Let me ask you a few more things that just kind of came up in my mind. Can you fill our listeners and viewers in on the state of the police district councils? And then I have a few others. So save me a little time here.
Sure. So, our district council members are our kind of current newest elected roles. So there are 3 elected members to each of our police districts. Here in the 49th Ward, we're in the 24th Police District. So one of our elected counselors had to step down for personal reasons and was unable to continue the role. And so we had an application process to fill the vacancy. So we're hoping to see a decision made on that vacancy soon. They did just host their monthly district council meeting last Sunday. So you can check my newsletter. We keep the monthly meetings up to date there. I'd encourage people to stop in. And so this is your elected officials that work on things specific to police performance and safety in our district. So if you've got concerns, if you've got ideas, if you want to know more about what's happening with police in our area, that's the place to go.
Let's move to homelessness. We had an issue in our ward for a while with a number of people camped out. That seems to be resolved. They were going to build a new shelter. I think construction has started. What's your sense on homelessness in the ward and beyond? Since we did lose that election,
The referendum for Bring
a lot of
Chicago
money
Home.
for Bring Chicago Home, which I hope will come up again.
Yeah. So I'll say, we still are seeing more and more people experiencing homelessness here in the 49th Ward and, of course, across the city. I'm really excited that construction has been progressing and quite well on the men's shelter that will be located on Clark Street near the Gateway Center. I actually get to go and take a tour this Wednesday to kind of see how the progress is going. They got all the bathroom and sink fixtures donated by Kohler. IKEA's donated the furniture. They're completely redoing that building to make it just a wonderful space for what is a great program from Northside Housing Services. So men who are experiencing homelessness will be in a program, have some semi-permanent housing with on-site social services and whatever they need in order to help them move into permanent supportive housing at that location. And as we enter the budget season for the city, it's one of my top priorities to continue to push for the funding that we need for the rapid rehousing events, which were so successful in helping people experiencing homelessness in Tui Park and other parts of our ward to continue, as well as rental assistance. I think that's the biggest concern I see still coming up with 49th Ward residents. Rents are going up. Wages aren't going up. People are just feeling the pressure. We have a lot of properties that are older that have been purchased by new owners here. They go through rehabs. The new owners charge a lot more rent. And we're seeing displacement at just a rapid rate. And so the rental assistance piece is going to be key. But our COVID funds we're in our last year of these COVID funds. And so without the Bring Chicago Home referendum passing, as you mentioned, we don't have any new sources of revenue that we have to fund services to help people prevent homelessness and, of course, to get out of homelessness. So as a city, it's going to be, I think, a hot button issue through this budget cycle.
Let me ask you a little bit about the DuSable Lakeshore Drive, which is, one of our most sacred things in the city is our lakefront.
Yeah. And we just had Bike the Drive yesterday. Natalia made me ride 20 miles.
That's good. Well, you're both jocks, so it's good that you've been running.
We hadn't been on a bicycle in more than a month, Michael. And she's like, let's hop on the bike. We can do 20 miles. We did. And it was wonderful.
I rode the drive one time when I did a triathlon, and it was really wonderful.
Yeah.
But there's been over the years there's been talk of putting Lakeshore Drive out into the lake, and now there's talk about redoing it, and there's a lot of pushback because it's not as environmentally conscious as we would like. What's your sense? What should people know about the attempts to alter Lakeshore Drive?
So they should know that we're coming up on what will probably be a once in our lifetime major infrastructure project. So for more than a decade, the city, working with the State Department of Transportation, has been evaluating, measuring, looking at numbers, and preparing to ask the feds for funds to help us redefine the drive. Now, some of the news as of late is that they've gone through a multi-year process, and they came to show us the 5 kind of final plans they came up with, and the city has said, hey, this is the one that we think is the best. And myself, many other alders, a lot of our state representatives, like our state rep Kelly Cassidy, our state senator Mike Simmons, all the representation for the 49th Ward, we find this essential plan that the city and IDOT have landed on to be pretty lacking, specifically in what we could do more for public transit. So if we're going to be redefining the drive, and some key things, they're looking to add more park space. They're looking to create more safety, right? So looking at like the S-curve, where do we see a lot of bad traffic accidents? What could we do? But of course, some of the other important goals in this once in a lifetime infrastructure project are to increase access for public transit, and of course, to make it easier for pedestrians, bicyclists, and people kind of on all non-vehicle, non-car mobility to access the park space and the lake. And how can we redefine this for transit? So we think at minimum, we should see some dedicated bus rapid transit lanes, right? They're some of our most efficient and effective ways of getting people quickly on public transit from one place to another, particularly of import to us here in the 49th Ward. But we also we think we can see more on kind of the environmental sustainability front. So right now we're in a place where we have very vocally with advocates told the city, the mayor, the governor, and IDOT. This isn't quite good enough, and we're going to continue to push on that. Of note, I'll say I've got two things that are related, and you might see come up in committee over the next couple of months. One of them, related to Lakeshore Drive, is we're trying to create a shoreline advisory board. So as you mentioned, Lakeshore Drive is such a kind of seminal part of Chicago because it's on the lakefront. This is our most valuable resource, I think, outside of our people. And we don't really have any entity, any government entity or group or agency within the public sphere that advocates for and manages the lakeshore. And so, I'm proposing legislation that would create this shoreline advisory board, much like the Urban Forestry Advisory Board, which I sit on as chair of our Environmental Protection Committee, so that we can have a say. And why this is important is because the federal government, of course, has a lot of say on the shoreline. And us here in Rogers Park and Edgewater and Uptown, but especially Rogers Park and Edgewater, when we go through shoreline erosion, when we deal with different issues, when homes are at risk, we lost 3 beaches in 2020, right? We need to have a say as Chicagoans in what happens to our shoreline. Without a shoreline advisory board, the only group in conversation right now with the Army Corps is CDOT. And based on what we've seen from the Lakeshore Drive plan, we feel like we need a few more people at the table and a public, transparent process so that Chicagoans know we've got good advocacy at the table when it comes to any future decisions about our shoreline, our parks, and Lakeshore Drive.
That's good. Now, you did mention that you are involved with the Committee on Environmental Protection and Energy. You are the chairperson through 2027. What do you got going on? What should we know about or be concerned about as you bring about more environmental justice on some of the issues that face us?
Sure. So, first off, our next committee for the Environmental Protection and Energy Committee meeting will be coming up at 12:30 next Tuesday, September 10th. So the public are always welcome to attend. We'll be in room 201A in City Hall. So again, open to the public. You can come, you can submit written comment, you can give public comment in person. And of course, we do have these meetings live streamed thanks to our city clerk, Ana Valencia. So we'll be talking about the Shoreline Advisory Board. We're also going to be talking about an issue that impacts us, but is particularly impacting folks in the Woodlawn and Inglewood community right now. And that is the Norfolk Southern Railroad. And community members there have been dealing with the negative environmental impacts of the rail station going through there. And they're looking at, tragedies that have happened in other communities, like in East Palestine, Ohio, with that train derailment, and have some big concerns about what we could see in Chicago. And we are going to be having just like a subject matter hearing on some of those rail safety issues. We've got railways all throughout Chicago. In some ways, they define a lot of our neighborhoods. And so those are two big issues we're going to be tackling in the Environmental Protection and Energy Committee coming up this month. But some of the broader work for people to keep a lookout for, we'll have some end of the year reports on our Urban Forestry Advisory Board, what's going on with our urban canopy and how it's being better maintained and grown. And then, of course, going into next year, looking at the city's work with our Department of Environment on cumulative impacts, and of course on our Clean and Affordable Buildings Ordinance, CABO, where we're looking at setting emission standards for new construction.
A lot of information there. Now I got
So much info.
I got one more. I got a bunch of questions, but we're not going to get them all in today. But let me ask you, kind of broadly, how did you get involved in the movement? How did you move from like kind of demonstrating and organizing to becoming a person in electoral politics and becoming our alderwoman? And maybe finish up with some suggestions how we all can focus on local and issues beyond to make the world a better place.
So we'll see if I can do this without the dogs chiming in here. But they might have something to say about
We
this.
like dogs. Dogs are
Right?
fine.
We like dogs. My work in local community organizing is just inextricably tied to getting into electoral politics. So I think, like a lot of people, I had no interest in electoral politics.
Right.
I voted regularly, right? Not a problem there. My parents raised me to be very active, but I didn't see myself in electoral politics, not a future in public office, nor did I see myself, honestly, in a lot of the local partisan organizing. So, all the work kind of going into things around individual candidates and people as the only solution did not appeal to me as a young person. Working with my neighbors to identify issues locally and act on local solutions, and to kind of organize in the form of community action or protests. That was action, right? And I've always been drawn to action. But it's through those organizing experiences and really getting to know neighbors here in the 49th Ward, but across the city, and in cities around the country, that what I found is I really wanted to do systems change. And, after enough people asked me to run for office, I took on this role with the hope that not only could I, of course, help neighbors address constituent issues and make Chicago a better city, but that I could contribute to the system change that we need to see in the city of Chicago. And at heart, and this is going to sound pretty cheesy, I am just a big champion for democracy. Um,
Right
it's
on.
it's the way we live. It's an active thing, and it takes, just like being an anti-racist, right? Being a democratic actor. It's continual. It's continual change. It's continual work. We have to work for our democracy. And so, like, especially as we're approaching in another election season, we've got a vote to make in November, right? With several people on the ballot, not just for president, but for other offices. And that's one part of our democratic action. But every day, every week, right, all year long, we need to be engaging locally with our neighbors, so that once we see whoever's in office based on our vote, we can also work to hold them accountable and continue to work on the changes, the policies, and the programs that we know are going to make our city and our country one that works for everyone.
Well, as one of your constituents, I want to say I think you're doing a great job, and I really appreciate all the work that you do, and the team and the people around you. And you and I both do live in a pretty wonderful part of Chicago, in
Yeah,
a in a pretty wonderful city. So you keep up the great work, and I'll have you back on as soon as I can get you back on, and I'll see you in the neighborhood.
sounds
Thank you.
great. Thanks,
Thank
Michael.
you, Maria. See you later. Everyone else, you stay tuned. We're going to come right back. We're going to talk a little more politics with our kind of a resident political analyst these days, Don Rose. He's been around a long time, has a lot of insight, and we'll be right back to hear what he has to say about what's going on. Okay, all you citizens of the world, welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of September 7th in the year 2024. And once again, I'm honored to bring on Don Rose, who I got to confess, I always look forward to having him on because I respect his kind of insight and observations about what goes on in the political world. And I'm glad that he allows us to invite him on a regular basis, it seems. So hello to you, Don, and thanks for being here.
Well, it's always good to talk to you.
We just had a Democratic convention here in town. There was a lot of build up to it, a lot of interviews in my own world based on that photograph of me from 1968. One of them, I think, was you had given them my name, and that might have been the Judy Woodruff interview I did. But you, I'm sure, were pretty much watching what was going on, listening what was going on leading up to the convention. There was a lot of angst and drama about permits and march routes. What's your take on how it all came down?
Well, it couldn't have been closer to perfect from the point of view of somebody who is trying to elect a Democrat who's going to defeat Donald Trump. We knew it was going to be a celebratory and probably well-run convention, I mean, all the pieces were in place. There was really no suspense about what was supposed to happen and so on. There were two concerns, or actually one large concern, based on 1968, and that is whether there would be any disturbances that made the Democrats look bad because of the protests on about the Palestinian Gaza war. There would be less from inside, but some potential from inside, because there were 30 or 40 so-called uncommitted delegates who were holding back because of the lack of progress in separating themselves from the Netanyahu end of the war. Was something we could go into for the next 3 hours if we wanted to. But anyway, the bottom line is that the people who were inside the convention, the dissenters, did not choose to do anything disruptive, although they were saddened by the fact that not a single person representing their view was permitted to speak. This was a very, very well-planned Hollywood production. It's said that actually that Steven Spielberg helped organize it. The speeches were, well planned. The personnel was, for the most part, top drawer. It garnered a lot of attention and went through smoothly. And on the outside, there were well-run protests from the Palestinian Palestinian groupings that were assembled there, although there were far fewer of them than that group had hoped. I think there may have been 3,000, 3,500 at peak. And that group, except for a minor episode, did not cause much of a disturbance, and the cops responded well. There was one mass arrest when a rump group that nobody knew about, called Behind Enemy Lines, tried to attack the Israeli consulate at another location, and they charged the police line. I have to say it was their fault, but the cops, I think, although they arrested 40 or 50 people, did not crack one head with a billy club. So we had a peaceful outside, and I have to say, Snelling, the new top cop in town, did a very, very good job. But I'm not one who hands out kudos to the police very much.
I know.
But I have to say, this was a good job. And it's largely because he was on the scene all the time supervising. So any cop who might have gone out of line was very conscious that the boss was watching.
Well, I think the police force has changed. I mean, in all my interviews, I always talk about how it was mostly white men, not college educated back in the day. And now it's pretty, women, a lot of people, African-American, Latino, Asian, etc. Let me ask you, Don, do you think it was a mistake that the Democrats didn't let the Palestinian issue be addressed a little bit more? And following up on that, what do you think about the current situation in Gaza with the 6 hostages being killed and massive demonstrations as we speak in the streets in Israel?
Well, from the point of view of the producers of the convention, it was a proper move, because something like that, bringing that up in the middle of a very buoyant situation, could have cast a pall on the whole hyper reaction to the convention. So, although I morally would have liked to have seen someone speak, I understand why they made that decision. They wanted perfection all the way through, and they really got it. Although you could say that there's a legitimate case for having put on such a speaker. So they came out of the convention. And buoyant is a word I keep using over and over. Kamala went into that convention with her numbers on the rise and came out day by day. There was not what they call a convention bounce, where somebody gains 5-6 points at a time, but inch by inch, she continues, to this very day, I think, gaining support and gaining numbers. She recently, I think an ABC poll showed her something like 4 to 6 points ahead, which is outside the margin of error. So she's doing well. I don't know how much this vaunted sit-down interview slowed the progress, but it didn't hurt her. Now I've got a whole rap on that subject, but
well, let me throw in here that I do think that it was a pretty joyous event, and I think a lot of us felt pretty good. But I also, clearly I understand it, but the Democrats definitely are moving to the center, at least at this time, whether it's around the border, whether it's around patriotism and the flag, the war, et cetera. They seem to, kind of damp down what tendencies we might like to see.
Well, I like them moving, reclaiming the question of patriotism. Yeah. That's been something that people have been debating, since the 60s. There was a guy who, Johnny, I can't remember his last name.
Johnny Rawson, Little Red, White, and Blue book.
Right. He this is back in the 60s when things were really talking about America, KKK, and so on. He says we've got to regain the question of patriotism, and so I think this was a very good move. Now the situation over there continues to be devastating. Biden's longtime sentimental friendship, which has strained a lot, with Netanyahu, has prevented him from taking serious steps, more serious steps than noodling the guy to end the war, to take on a ceasefire. It took him a long time just to say we want a ceasefire, and now that we've had they found recently executed 6 of the 110 or 15 hostages left, and maybe more to come. It finally has. We're getting major eruptions inside Israel. And, a general strike called and so on. But I continue to feel that Netanyahu is immovable on this, that he really doesn't want to end this thing. And he would even risk a larger Middle East war because it keeps his ass out of jail. Where he would he'd be out of office first and then go on trial, et cetera. Reminding me of some guy here who's trying to keep himself out of jail, so he's running for president. I don't have a solution to it. The people in Israel are themselves conflicted, although I think, unfortunately, the majority support that war. Now, it's going to be endless, in my view, because for every tragic bombing and civilian deaths in Gaza, and these horrendous attacks on the West Bank, you build up, you get new recruits for Hamas, which
Yeah.
are the bad guys. I'm one who believes that there should be a Jewish state, but not at the horrendous cost. They're not going to dissolve, but they've got to find a way toward peace, which we've been saying for decades now.
Time.
I grew up personally profoundly unhappy about the potential for what we have long called the two-state solution.
Yeah, well, I would love I read one thing that had me leaning toward one state that had both Israelis and Palestinians together, but that's pretty doubtful. And I'd be great to see a two-state solution, but it looks pretty far off. Let's move on from that a little bit. And how about the political race? I mean, we are down to 60 some odd days left until we go to the polls. We have a lot of good news about Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, but on the other hand, we don't know what'll happen, what resistance. How do you see the race these days? And we can break it down from the presidency to the Senate to the House. Your call. Let it rip.
Well, to begin, one has to acknowledge that the numbers, which are never predictive, but only indicating. And I always look, when talking about the numbers and the polling, I look for a direction, knowing that the numbers can be wrong at any given time. But when we see a constant direction, as we are now, at least up to yesterday's announcement of a positive ABC poll, the direction is all ours. That is, Harris continues to lead. She's winning by, depending on who you look at, 3 to 6 points nationally, and is either barely ahead, narrowly ahead, or tied with all the 7 so-called battleground states. Now, what is pleasing to me about the battleground states is that she has expanded the map. We talked about she's got to win the blue wall of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Well, we are seriously in play, even in Georgia, in Arizona, in North Carolina, and Nevada. So hypothetically, she could lose Pennsylvania and pick up those votes elsewhere. I am not calling the race at this point because so much can happen, but things are moving in the correct direction. And I think the September 10th, a little more than a week away, a debate is going to be close to definitive. Of course, you never know what's going to happen. There could be a war, an invasion. Other countries can launch attacks that would screw things up for the Democrats. So it's never wise to predict this early. But we have to remember, on the national numbers, a Democrat has to be ahead by 3 to 5 points at least in order to compensate for the electoral college advantage that Republicans have. In the battleground states, of course, if you win by a half a point, you've won. And that's what's gone on. That's the way it's been. It's going to be close, and it's going to still boil down to those battleground states. But I'm looking forward to the big debate because I think she finds her métier there. If you'll remember, she really cleaned up on Joe Biden in the first and only Democratic primary debate 4 years ago, where it took place in 2019. And then when she was already on the ticket and she had to debate Mike Pence for the vice presidency, she took him apart too. So we know she can do that, and particularly when we see her in action a couple of times in Senate investigations, she handles herself beautifully there. So and Trump has his own abilities to debate, but I think she can staunch him, and she gets under his skin, and if she knows just how to do it, she can take him apart. And if she doesn't do overkill to make her look, quote, bitchy or something like that, which women still have to worry about, about looking too strong or too aggressive in a debate. I'm optimistic about the result of that debate. So.
Well, I hope you're right, and I'm. That's kind of where I'm leaning, but we'll always see. We've been fooled before. Let's give me a minute or two on the Senate and then the House. If we get the presidency and win the House and the Senate, we got some golden time ahead of us, perhaps. If we don't win one or the other, we don't have the trifecta. What's your sense in the Senate? I mean, we got John Tester is an issue. It looks like Sherrod Brown is good in Ohio. I'm not sure. What's your sense about the Senate races?
Well, Tester is always up there on the knife edge. I am personally optimistic about him because I think Trump has stalled. He has not gained anything from anybody, and he may have lost a little bit over the last couple of weeks. We don't know for sure. But Vance, who is very aggressive, is very unpopular. So all of his mouthings, I think, only hurt the Trump situation. So I think we can hold the Senate because I think there might be a surprise or two coming up. If we lose one, there's a couple of possibilities. There's always the unexpected, and I am what should I say? Not as optimistic about holding the Senate as I am at the moment about the presidency. I am pretty well convinced we will take the House and possibly substantially. So we may be close to the trifecta.
Who are the Senate? Maybe out of the blue, we hope might come to the fore. Are you talking about Florida? What other states should we be watching?
Florida is a potential. I think Texas is even a potential here. I mean, that would be a huge surprise. But both of those states, both in the presidency and in the Senate races, are much, much closer than anybody expected. I mean, we're talking about less than 5% presidential potential in Florida. There's a big abortion issue on the ballot there. And this guy Scott has never been that the incumbent has never been quite that popular. So I think that's a possibility. And Cruz is always winds up being a narrow case. And in this situation, with the direction things are going, I think there's a potential in Texas just for that. Just as I believe there's a strong potential of Harris carrying North Carolina.
Well, we hope that all goes that direction. I'd like to ask you a couple of things. You can bring them together however you want to handle it. One is, where do you get your information? Do you go to the regular sources, New York Times, Washington Post, The Guardian? Do you have any secret e-newses and sites that you check out, or informants? Anything you'd like to shed some light on that?
Well, I use all those sources, of course. The New York Times, with an occasional flaw, is still a very positive source. I watch a lot of TV. I watch much more TV than I should all day long, looking at both CNN and MSNBC. And CSN has some very insightful people on it. They always have that, and they got Axelrod, my friend David Axelrod, among others, but they have dissenters, and they have very objective people like John King, who is so often overlooked and underestimated, and he's one of the best analysts there is. And I also have a network of one of several what I call professional networks of listing involving pollsters and messaging people. And a guy named Mike Podhorzer puts these things together. And he was, although you don't see him on TV a lot, he was the political director of the AFL-CIO, another one of the most insightful people around. And he's kind of a secret. So I try to put these all together. And I think what might set me apart from other people doing the same thing is that, I've had my own experience running campaigns and consulting for campaigns, and that gives me an insight advantage over, people who are observers or reporters. So it's all, put it all together, and I spout something out every Monday about what my view of the world. And I used to include, things going on in Chicago and just general complaints about television or cultural and so on. The situation here is so dire. I've just spent most of the last year, every column just about the national election forthcoming.
Yeah, can I give your email out so that people who want to get your e-news could contact you?
Yeah, it's donrose65 at AOL.
One of the things that we're about out of time. I was going to ask you your movement history, because I like to ask people that, and hopefully they inspire any younger people who might be listening. But why don't you give us one highlight from your career that you would share with our listeners and viewers at this time, Don?
No. Well, my obituary is probably going to say I was a standout for having run Jane Byrne's campaign and started to break up the machine. But my personal highlight was in 1972 when I ran a Republican campaign to defeat the Democrat Edward Hanrahan, who was half responsible for the murder of Fred Hampton. And defeating Ed Hanrahan it certainly put me on the map, along with a few other things I had done. But that was my personal highlight.
Okay, brother, and all you people out there who've been listening to Live from the Heartland, I want to thank the people who made the show possible. Our guest, Maria Haddon, the wonderful Alderwoman from the 49th Ward. Our political pundit, go-to guy, Don Rose. Our engineer, Hal James. Our producers, Katie Hogan, Tom Clark, and Lynn Orman. We'll be back next week with a couple more interesting guests and some information. Stay tuned to the left end of your dial. All power to the people. Keep doing good in the world.